Straight or angled scope? That's the big question. What are the differences and how does it affect usage out in the field? Optically, there's no difference in performance when you're using a straight or angled scope. You might have a slight variation in weight, but we're only talking a few grams. So in terms of the actual image and transportation, there's no difference. So it mainly comes down to comfort and viewing position. From a standing position here, I've got the straight and the angled scopes set up on the same subject. Now, in terms of height, I'm just over 6 feet tall, so you can get a feel for what kind of height I've got these tripods set. You can see immediately with the angled scope, I do not need such a high tripod. With the straight scope, because I want it at my eye level, I need a taller tripod, which is very often more expensive, heavier, and just bigger and bulkier to carry around. Now, obviously, there is an option to raise the central column on your tripod to get that scope higher or lower. But the ideal is always to keep that central column in the low position, because when you've got it set up high, there's more risk of instability and shaking. The tripod's much more sturdy when you've got your central column at its lowest setting. If you're new to using a spotting scope, then it can take some getting used to using an angled scope, locating your subject. You've got to train yourself to look down and then through so you can work out where the subject is. With a straight spotting scope, it's more intuitive straight away because it's a straight line to your target. So you'll find using a straight scope, you'll lock onto your subject probably more quicker than you would with an angled, especially if you're new to spotting scopes. Using the angled scope, you can see that my setup is more compact. My tripod is at a lower level. I don't need the height because the eyepiece is pointing up towards me. Viewing is very comfortable when you're using an angled scope. Once you get used to using the angled and finding your subject rapidly, you can really appreciate this nice comfortable view that you get through an angled scope. When I'm using the angled scope, if there's more than one person out with you on the day, you're both using the same scope and you're of different heights, the nice thing is you can adjust the tripod mount there and you can angle it down. You're still using that angle there, but you can see how I can lower it down and raise it back up. So you can adjust the height. You can do the same thing on the straight, but you don't get the amount of height difference. It's also worth considering if you're looking up at an acute angle, maybe up into the trees to see a bird, or if you're going to use the scope for astronomy where you're looking at the moon or other astral objects, then the angled scope will give you a more comfortable experience. You can see here both scopes are on similar angles. With the angled, I can look. I don't have to get into too much of an uncomfortable position to use the scope at an acute vertical angle. With the straight, it's more difficult. I've almost got to bend down and look, and it's much more of a struggle to get the view. It's a similar story when you're looking at acute angles going down. So maybe you're on a cliff edge looking down over a beach or something like that, and you need to look down at an acute angle. With the straight and the angle, I may have to lower the tripod. Certainly on the straight, I will have to lower these legs in order to use it. Now I want to use the tripod and the scope with minimal adjustments. So the trick I could use on the angle is, again, I can just release the tripod mount and I can get that scope to come down on its side, and now that gives me a comfortable view looking down. With the straight, I've either got to stand on a box, which obviously isn't an option, or I've got to lower these legs down, make the scope come down lower, and then I can use it. Here I am sitting inside a hide. Now hides are very different. They have different constructions, different height of windows, that kind of thing. So depending on where you are, depends which kind of scope's going to suit you best. But I've got both scopes on tripods here, and you can see immediately the straight scope is an easier option. I'm above the level here. I can see through the window quite clearly. I'm sitting on the stool, and it's a comfortable height to use. So the straight scope's doing really well there. The angled, I've got to get it to this height so I can see out over the view, but it's too high for me to use in a seating position that I'd have to stand up to use, which is a little bit uncomfortable. Don't forget, you have got that option of adjusting the tripod mount, so I could pivot the scope to my eye level here and use, but it's a little bit more tricky to find the subject. The straighter scope is more intuitive. In this kind of hide, where I've got this open space, this open vista, no glass in the way, I tend to use a bean bag And what that means is the space in front of me is free of tripods. There's no tripod legs obscuring my position. I'm nice and comfortable, and I can use the beanbag to rest the scope on and still get that stability. So at this seated position, I'm trying the straight scope on the beanbag, just resting it on there. The position's perfect. I haven't got a strain. I can stay in the seated position comfortable. It's at my eye level. I can use the scope. I'm just looking at a heron at the minute on the bank there. No problem. I can move it around. It's really comfortable. Nice, lots of space. It's ideal. You can see already the angled scope's a little bit too high for me. I'll have to strain to look over. Again, it's no problem to turn the scope on its side and still use the support of this beanbag. The only thing is it's not as intuitive as using the straight scope where you're pointing direct at the subject. You've got to get used to working on this angle. So for me, using the beanbag in the hide, I tend to go for my straight scope. Let's briefly talk about Digiscoping. So adding your smartphone or DSLR camera to the end of the scope to take photographs. What you will find is the serious Digiscopers, those that are tending to do as much Digiscoping as they are observation, will often choose a straight scope. And that's because the scope, when it's in its straight format, with a camera on the end, is more intuitive and is acting more like a traditional camera lens setup. So you're pointing straight at the subject, you can find your subject a lot more quicker, and it just feels and acts more like a conventional lens. This is particularly relevant with the Digiscopers using DSLR or mirrorless cameras on a straight scope. They'll very often use gimbal heads that you tend to see more on traditional cameras and DSLR setups. So with the straight scope, they could use that gimbal head, pan and track much more easily than you can with an angled scope. So if you want to capture birds in flight or moving subjects, then a straight scope gives you that panning ability much easier than an angled. Both angled and straight spotting scopes are ideal for Digiscoping. They both work well, and once you get used to using the angled or the straight, you're going to get some great photographs. If you're going to be doing a lot of Digiscoping, as much as you are observation, then consider the straight scope. You can see here I've got my smartphone adapter on the angled scope, and I've got a very nice, comfortable position, nice viewing angle here. It's working perfectly. Sometimes with the sun glare, if the sun's behind you, it can be quite difficult to read the screen sometimes, but that's just down to the environment that you're in at the time. Swapping over to the straight, I'll push that onto the eyepiece there. You can see how that looks and feels more like a lens with that straight view through. Also using the straight scope, especially on the smartphone screens and the LED screens on the back of cameras, there's less risk of glare in this position than there is when it's pointing up towards the light source. So in some aspects, sometimes it's easy to read and see the screen on a straight scope. If you're not sure which is right for you, straight or angled, just remember optically there's no difference in performance. There may be a few millimeters and a few grams here and there in the weight and the size, but nothing major at all. So it's purely down to the viewing angle and the comfort that you want out in the field. My advice would be, if you're not sure, go to a show, go to a fair, go and see a dealer, get both scopes out on the tripod side by side and see which suits you best.